You cannot hold the lance anymore. Not completely. Not the way it must be held, steady at the shoulder, weight distributed through the elbow and wrist, the whole arm an extension of the horse's momentum. You felt it in August, during the summer levy that failed before it began. The marshal called the muster. You answered. You rode out. But halfway through the first day's formation drill, your right shoulder locked with a heat that spread down through the joint like poured iron, and you had to let the lance tip fall, and the man riding beside you, a younger son of a minor lord from the valley 2 days east, watched it happen without saying anything, which was worse than if he had spoken. Knighthood is not a title that belongs to you. It is a function you perform inside a system that does not care about your name. The system cares about horses, armor, 40 days of mounted service per year, and the credible threat of violence administered on behalf of the Lord who granted you the land you eat from. When those things are present and reliable, the system works. When they become uncertain, the system does not mourn. It adjusts. It finds a younger man whose shoulder does not lock. It recalculates, and the recalculation does not include a chair by the fire and boys gathered at your feet wanting stories about banners. The autumn is coming. The fields north of your hall have already begun to yellow. The fodder must be measured against what the horses consumed last winter, and then measured again against what this winter may demand. Your armor hangs in the passage between the hall and the storeroom. It has hung there since August. You have not lifted it down, not because you have chosen not to, because you already know what will happen when you try. This is not a story about disgrace. Disgrace requires a dramatic moment. This is subtler and colder and more final than disgrace. This is the story of how a man built entirely from military function survives when the function ends. The answer is not comfortable. The answer involves charters and wax and witnessed signatures and the slow parceling away of everything that made the function possible. The answer involves walking into a world that was never designed to accommodate your continued existence and negotiating the terms of your own irrelevance. The manor is modest, 2 days' ride from the nearest town of any consequence. Dependent on one mill along the creek to the east and 2 substantial fields that produce grain in sufficient quantity for rents and household consumption with little margin. There is a smaller outlying field of poorer soil to the west that has been rented to a family of peasants for 2 generations. The land supports a hall built from stone on the lower floor and timber above, which means it is cold from October through April and damp in the lower rooms for most of March. There are 3 horses. 2 are working animals used for farm tasks. One is the destrier, the war horse, who cost more than any other single thing on this property and who consumes more in fodder and care during a winter month than 2 peasant families consume in grain over the same period. The estate is not failing. It is not prosperous. And it is balanced in the specific way that small fiefs are balanced, on the assumption that every obligation is met, that every yield is adequate, and that nothing unexpected forces a choice between competing necessities. Feudal tenure of this kind has no tolerance for variance. The system assumes you will ride. The system assumes your equipment will be maintained. The system does not ask how old you are. There is no codified retirement age for a knight. The records of the period do not contain a legal mechanism by which a man says he is done and then receives maintenance in return for his service. There is no pension document, no formal honorable discharge, no ceremony of release. The system has never built one because the system was not designed around the experience of knights. It was designed around the management of land and the extraction of military service from that land. If the land can produce another knight, it will. If you are that knight, you serve. If you cannot serve, the land does not wait. The armor needs inspection before winter storage. This is the annual ritual. Every autumn, before the first hard frost makes handling metal painful, the mail is checked for broken rings. The padding beneath the hauberk is examined for rot or vermin. The helmet interior is inspected, the saddle and stirrups checked for cracking. It has always been a ritual of confirmation. You lift the mail, you feel its familiar weight, you carry it into the yard where the light is better, and you demonstrate to yourself and to whoever watches that the equipment is maintained and the body that wears it is intact. And this year the mail hangs heavier than it should. Not heavier, in fact. You know the weight precisely. It has not changed, but the motion of lifting it, both arms raised, mail bunched and pulled from its hook, produces a grind in the right shoulder that stops you at the top of the movement. Your senior retainer, who has served this household for 11 years and who has watched you complete this ritual every autumn for that entire period, does not look away quickly enough. He is standing near the wall with a cloth for wiping down the metal, and you can see in his stillness that he has noted the hesitation. He does not say anything. He waits. You lower the mail onto the bench and step back and press the heel of your left hand into the shoulder joint through the wool of your tunic. The joint moves. It is not broken, but it will not bear the upward extension required to receive a lance cleanly against a mounted target. Outside, the sky is white and uniform, the light already thin in the way of late October. The yard smells of hay and horse and wood smoke from the kitchen. Your Herr, your eldest surviving son, who is 17 and taller than you by 2 fingers' width, is working with one of the horses near the gate. He does not need to look at you to know what has happened in the yard. Sound carries in the morning. The destrier is led out for evaluation. He is a grey horse, 9 years old, which is not young for a war horse. He is sound. He stands well and answers commands and carries himself with the controlled energy that characterizes well-trained cavalry horses. Looking at him, you can calculate almost exactly what he will cost through the winter. You can also calculate what you would need to spend to replace him with an animal of equivalent quality, trained for formation and for the weight of a fully armed rider. The number is large. The reserves in the chest in the lower room are not large. Your son watches the horse. He watches you watching the horse. He does not speak about what he is thinking, which is that the animal is expensive for a property that may not require him next campaign season. The inspection is finished. The mail is hung back up. The record of it lives only in the household's collective memory, unwritten but permanent. Winter begins to close. The hall's upper room is heated by a brazier and by the bodies of the household members who sleep there. The lower room catches cold from the stone and holds it through the night. The morning smell of the hall is smoke, straw, and damp wool. By November, the hours of usable daylight in the yard shrink to 5 or 6. Work that requires visibility, smith tasks, harness repair, anything involving inspection of equipment or animals, must be completed between the mid-morning and mid-afternoon, and this compression creates a rhythm of urgency, followed by long evenings of little light and counted stores. The manor's accounts for the autumn season are tallied by the knight himself, with assistance from the parish priest who passes through the village once a fortnight and who can be relied upon to record numbers accurately. Grain yields from the 2 main fields are adequate, slightly below the best years but within normal range, and mill revenues from the eastern creek are consistent. The peasants' rents arrive in the expected combination of coin and kind. Against this, the debits, winter fodder for 3 horses, maintenance of equipment, household provisions for the family and retainers, and the always-present calculation of what military obligation will cost in the coming year. Military obligation. In the late 13th century, a mounted knight owing 40 days of service to his baron must arrive at that service equipped. This means a war horse capable of carrying an armored man in formation, armor in serviceable condition, lance, sword, shield, and the personal provisions for the initial period of the campaign before the lord's household assumes feeding costs. It also means, increasingly, that campaigns extend beyond 40 days, and that the arrangement of scutage, payment in lieu of service, has become formalized enough that failing to appear personally does not necessarily constitute breach, but it does cost coin the estate may not easily spare. The baron who holds the grant above this fief is not a distant or indifferent lord. He is a practical man who needs mounted men and who tracks which of his minor knights are aging into unreliability. He has not communicated anything directly. He has not needed to. His marshal, who oversees the annual muster records, noted at the August levy that the knights' formation participation was incomplete. Incomplete is the word used in muster accounts. It is a bureaucratic word. It means that the knight's lance was not level when it needed to be level, and that the marshal observed this and recorded it, and that the record now exists in parchment that will not soften its language regardless of the reasons behind it. The word incomplete is a beginning. The system moves slowly, but it moves in one direction. A neighbor from 2 valleys east arrives in November for a matter of boundary clarification. He's a knight of similar standing, roughly the same generation, and he brings his own son who rides beside him with the easy posture of a man whose joints do not stiffen in the cold. The boundary matter concerns grazing rights along the ridge between their respective properties, a dispute that has been intermittently active for a decade, and that has always been settled through the mutual deterrence of 2 men who could both, in theory, bring men in armor and make the disagreement painful for the other party. The meeting takes place in the hall over food and wine. It is structured and civil. Legal language is used. References to prior agreements are cited from memory. The boundary is discussed with maps made of rough parchment that show the ridge in approximate terms. Nothing is resolved, but the conversation establishes positions. What changes is not the argument, but the weight behind it. A decade ago, when both men could ride the ridge together and indicate with physical presence exactly where the boundary would be enforced, the implicit threat of that enforcement was present in the room. Now the neighbor's son sits at the table and handles the wine cup with the casual confidence of someone who expects to be riding that ridge for the next 30 years, and his father occasionally defers to the son's memory of specific landmarks. And the weight in the room has shifted without anyone naming what has shifted. The neighbor will not press the grazing boundary this winter, but he now knows something that he will remember come spring. Your son sits at the end of the table. He says very little, but his presence is noted. The destrier needs work during the winter months to maintain condition. A war horse that is not exercised deteriorates. Musculature softens. Responsiveness dulls. The particular training required for battle and formation drill must be maintained or re-established at considerable cost in time and effort. This work falls to the knight and to the senior retainer. In previous winters, the morning training was a routine that required perhaps an hour and a half in the yard, working the horse through lateral movements, through approaches and stops, through the exercises that reinforce the animal's tolerance for close proximity to weapons and noise. This winter, mounting requires assistance, not every day. Some mornings the shoulder is manageable and the knee that has developed its own resistance to extension does not make itself felt until the horse moves at speed. But on the cold mornings, and the cold mornings become more frequent by December, the combination of reduced joint flexibility and the horse's own increased tension in the cold makes mounting without a step or a hand from the retainer increasingly necessary. The retainer provides it without comment. This is his function. But the assistance is now a regular fixture of the morning training, and regular fixtures become established facts, and established facts circulate. A knight who cannot mount without assistance cannot reliably answer a dawn muster. The morning musters of a campaign happen in dim light and noise and controlled confusion, with the horses that are not settled and ground that may be wet or frozen, and every man must be capable of getting into the saddle without requiring another man's hands and attention. The margin for limitation in a campaign muster is essentially 0. By December, the morning training is shortened. The shoulder does not permit the lance work. The knee limits certain movements in the saddle. The training becomes walking and trotting, the basic maintenance of the horse's conditioning without the exercises that mimic combat. It is training that a competent groom could perform. It is no longer training that demonstrates a knight's continued competence. The son begins accompanying these sessions. At first as a participant in his own right, learning exercises he has been learning for years, then gradually as the dominant figure in the yard during the training period, directing the retainer, assessing the horse's condition, making the calls that were previously made by the knight. The transition is not announced. It accumulates through a sequence of mornings in which the son is simply more capable, more willing, and more present. There is no confrontation. There does not need to be one. The formal scutage notice arrives in late November by messenger from the baron's household. It is written in Latin, which the priest translates. The language is bureaucratically precise. It describes the military obligation due in the upcoming campaign season. It specifies the assessment value of the knight's fief for purposes of calculating the scutage rate and sets out the options: personal service with horse and arms, provision of a qualified substitute under the knight's name, or payment of the assessed scutage fee in coin. The fee is substantial. It is not ruinous in isolation, but it comes on top of the winter's expenses: fodder, maintenance, the ongoing cost of the household. And it arrives in the period when liquid coin is lowest. The autumn rents have been spent against autumn costs. The grain yields are stored in kind, not converted yet to coin. The mill revenues arrive quarterly, and the next quarter is February. The option of providing a substitute is calculated. There is a younger mounted man in the village, and a free tenant's son who has served as a retainer for 2 years and who rides adequately, though not with the training of a knight. Using him as a substitute is legally possible, but practically uncertain. The baron's marshal may accept him or may reject him as insufficiently equipped, which would convert the arrangement into a breach and invoke penalties. Hiring a properly equipped mounted substitute, a man with his own trained war horse and functional armor, costs more than the scutage fee itself. The calculation is made over 3 evenings with the priest and the son present. The reserves in the chest in the lower room are counted. Arrangements for converting a portion of grain stock to coin through the local market are considered but uncertain given winter market conditions. In the outlying western fields, rent income is small and committed to existing obligations. The calculation resolves towards scutage payment, but the reserves are insufficient to cover it in full from current stocks. The partial mortgaging of the outlying western field becomes necessary. A neighboring monastery, a Benedictine house a day and a half's ride to the north, holds records of prior land transactions in the region and has previously engaged in the purchase of revenue rights from minor knights whose circumstances require liquidity. The transaction is straightforward. A portion of the western field's annual grain revenue is pledged to the monastery in exchange for a lump payment that covers the scutage assessment. The field itself is not sold, only the revenue claim for a defined period of 7 years. This is how it begins. Not with a dramatic loss. With a document. With wax and witnessed signatures in the monastery's chapter house on a grey afternoon in early December, the stone floor cold beneath the boots, the smell of incense and old parchment, the scratch of the recording scribe's pen moving across parchment, while the abbot sits at the end of the table with the sealed agreement and a face that communicates nothing beyond administrative completion. The land has begun to move. 7 years of revenue from the western field. Not catastrophic, not irreversible, technically, if the knight can restore the reserves and buy back the revenue claim within the term. But the money from the scutage payment is gone the moment it leaves. It does not generate future revenue. It purchases only the absence of a formal breach in this season's obligation. Next season, so the same assessment will arrive. The western field revenue will no longer be available. The problem will be identical, shifted forward by 1 year and reduced in available options. The priest, who has seen similar arrangements among the minor knights of the region, says nothing evaluative when the document is signed. He records the transaction in his own notes and folds them into the sleeve of his robe and prepares to ride back to the village in the grey afternoon light. He has seen this pattern before. he will see it again. January arrives with a freeze that locks the creek and reduces the mill to stillness for 11 days. 11 days in which the mill produces no grain, no flour, and no revenue. The miller presents himself at the hall to explain and to be told what he already knows. The obligation resumes when the creek flows. The freeze is a normal event in the pattern of northern French winters. It has happened before. The mill's revenue shortfall in January is modest, but modest against an estate that has just committed western field revenues to the monastery means that the January household accounts produce a number that was not planned for. The fodder situation sharpens. The destrier requires 2 to 3 times the fodder of a working horse during winter maintenance. Against a freeze that has slowed market access and reduced available hay stocks, the knight faces the calculation he has been avoiding since October. The destrier is consuming resources at a rate that an estate without active campaign prospects cannot sustain indefinitely. A war horse is not simply an animal. It is the physical embodiment of military function. Without it, there is no mounted service. Without mounted service, there is no knightly identity in any operational sense. Selling the destrier is not a transaction. It is a declaration. But war horses cost coin to maintain, and coin is being produced by a smaller portion of the estate than it was 3 months ago, and the spring assessment will arrive regardless of what the destrier eats between now and April. The decision is delayed through January. The horse is worked less, maintained on reduced fodder, its condition monitored daily by the retainer who has been told to be careful and to tell him if the animal begins to deteriorate visibly. This is the management of a problem by reduction rather than resolution. The horse remains. The cost continues. The margin continues to narrow. In February, a second neighbor, a younger man, more aggressive, the holding land to the south, sends a formal written complaint regarding the grazing ridge, the same ridge that was discussed inconclusively in November. The complaint is addressed to the knight by name and copies the baron's administrative household, which is a deliberate escalation. A complaint that reaches the baron's record keepers creates a formal dispute that must be resolved through the baron's court or by mutual agreement, and resolution through the baron's court involves travel, attendance, the cost of gifts and hospitality for the officials who must be maintained during the proceedings, and the implicit disadvantage of being the party who appears less capable of enforcing his own boundaries through alternative means. The southern neighbor knows the knight cannot ride out and patrol the ridge. He may have known this since August, since the muster, since the incomplete notation in the marshal's records. The formal complaint is not a sudden aggression. It is a recognition of changed conditions. The son reads the complaint. His reading of it is visible in the slight change of his posture at the table. The way he shifts his weight forward and sets down his cup and looks at the document with an attention that suggests he understands exactly what it implies, which is that the dispute will require his involvement, not his father's. Attendance at the baron's court to answer the grazing complaint will require the knight to appear and to present his case. This means travel in February, which means cold roads and physical stress, and the exposure of his condition to the baron's household in an administrative context. It also means fees, some a notary to prepare the legal arguments, gifts to the court officials who determine scheduling and precedence, hospitality costs for the period of attendance. The son is sent instead, with the priest as legal preparation, and with the knight's seal to authorize his representation. The son is 17. He is capable and persuasive and physically imposing in the way of a young man who has trained seriously for 3 years. The substitution is made for practical reasons. The son is more capable of making the journey, more capable of presenting himself effectively in a court context that responds to visible martial capacity, and less likely to expose additional vulnerability through his appearance. The substitution is practical. It is also another document in the record, nay, another instance in which the knight's name appears in a formal proceeding but the knight's body is absent. The record accumulates. The court proceeding is inconclusive in the way that many such proceedings are inconclusive, when the outcome depends on relationships and relative influence that take time to establish. The southern neighbor has more resources and more allies in the baron's administrative circle. The son acquits himself adequately, but does not prevail completely. The grazing boundary is reaffirmed in principle, but a narrow strip of the disputed ridge is conceded to the southern neighbor as a compromise. The concession is small in acreage. It is documented, witnessed, and sealed. Territory has reduced. The son returns in late February with the record of the concession and without the expression of someone who considers it a failure. He considers it a beginning. He has met the baron's household. He has presented himself effectively. He has established a presence in the administrative context that his father has not occupied for 2 years. He is thinking about spring and about the muster and about the campaign that may follow. He is not thinking about his father's shoulder. In early March, the frost begins to soften. The creek runs again. The mill resumes. The birds in the valley above the eastern field begin the specific noise of early spring. That means the frozen silence of winter is over, and the world is preparing to become loud again with activity and obligation. The destrier is sold. The decision is made quietly, over one morning, between the knight and his senior retainer. The horse is sound. It will sell for a good price to a buyer who wants a trained war horse at the start of campaign season, which is the best time to sell. The decision to sell is framed as a practical reallocation of resources. The coin from the sale will cover the most pressing outstanding obligations and leave a manageable buffer through the spring. This framing is accurate. It is also a way of not saying what the sale means, which is that there will be no war horse on this estate under the knight's personal management. His son will need to acquire his own mount before the spring muster. The son has been riding the 2 working horses. He will ride to the muster on one of them, which is not ideal but is possible. And arrangements can be made with the baron's household to provision a campaign horse if the son performs adequately at the muster review. The buyer comes from the town 2 days east. He is a merchant who brokers horses for knights preparing for campaign. He arrives with coin and a groom who inspects the destrier with the practiced eye of someone who does this for profit. The inspection is thorough and professional. The horse is sound and the price is fair. The buyer counts coin into a leather pouch on the table in the hall, and the transaction is complete in less than an hour. The destrier leaves the yard in the morning. The knight watches it go from the hall doorway. The horse turns once at the gate, responding to some sound or smell from the direction of the stable. And then the buyer's groom draws it forward, and they pass through the gate and down the track, and out of sight. The armor still hangs in the passage. The sound of the yard is different after the horse is gone. The remaining 2 horses are working animals. They do not have the particular quality of attention that a trained war horse brings to its environment. The alertness, the readiness, the sense of potential energy in a well-trained cavalry horse standing in its stall. Without it, the yard is quieter and more ordinary. The Lenten season arrives in the liturgical calendar. The priest who visits the manor regularly increases his attendance during Lent, partly from pastoral obligation and partly because aging knights and their households become more attentive to spiritual accounting during this season. Mortality is present in the hall, in the way that mortality becomes present when a man who has spent his life surrounded by the apparatus of potential death, armor, weapons, horses, the memory of campaigns, reaches the age at which the apparatus no longer belongs to him in any operative sense. The Benedictine house to the north has been in correspondence with the priest. The abbot who received the Western Field Revenue transaction in December has sent, through the priest, a communication that is carefully written in the tone of pastoral care, but which carries within it the structure of a business proposition. The monastery offers, to knights of the region who find themselves at the intersection of advancing age and reduced martial capacity, a formal relationship described as confraternity. Yet the knight would be enrolled as a lay confrater of the monastery, not a monk, not vowed, not required to reside within the monastic walls except as he chooses. In exchange for a further grant of land revenue, or, in the most secure form of the arrangement, a transfer of actual land to the monastery's ownership, the confrater receives a guarantee of lifetime maintenance. Food, lodging within the monastery's guest facilities, medical care from the monks who maintain herbal knowledge, and perpetual prayers for his soul and the souls of his family. The guarantee is written. It is sealed. It is legally binding in ecclesiastical courts. The Church holds its documents. This is not charity. The monastery acquires revenue-producing land. Or the knight acquires guaranteed survival that does not depend on continued military performance or continued control of tenants who might drift toward the heir's authority. The arrangement is transactional, mutual, and ancient in its structure. The monasteries of the region hold records of similar transactions stretching back 200 years. Families appear, serve, diminish, and are absorbed. The land continues. The priest presents the proposition without advocacy or dissuasion. He is careful to specify the terms, to explain the obligations on both sides, to note what the knight would cede and what he would receive. The son is present at this explanation. He does not oppose the arrangement. He is interested in the details of which specific land parcels would be transferred. Because those parcels are precisely the ones he had anticipated inheriting. The negotiation that follows between father and son over the next several weeks is the most consequential conversation in the hall since the scutage assessment arrived in November. The son's position is not opposition, it is substitution. He proposes that the land grant to the monastery be drawn from the western field, which has already been partly committed, and from the outlying revenue claims rather than from the core fields and mill that produce the estate's primary income. He proposes this calmly and with the deference appropriate to a son addressing his father, but with the specificity of someone who has been thinking about these assets for some time. The knight listens. The priest records the discussion. The abbot's messenger, who has remained at the manor for 3 days, is consulted regarding the monastery's flexibility on which specific parcels constitute the land grant. A revised proposal emerges. The western field is transferred in full ownership rather than partial revenue claim. The outlying east mill, a smaller secondary structure that produces modest but consistent income, has its revenue claim assigned to the monastery for the period of the knight's natural life, after which the claim terminates and the mill returns to the estate. In exchange, the monastery guarantees lifetime maintenance, including a private room in the guest quarters, daily meals at the monastic standard, access to the infirmary, and masses said weekly for the knight's soul and the souls of his deceased wife and his parents. The terms are adequate. They are not generous. The monastery's negotiating position is comfortable because the alternatives available to an aging minor knight with declining income and diminishing physical capacity are limited, and the monastery knows it. The land transferred in this arrangement is worth more in aggregate than the value of the maintenance guarantee over a reasonable estimate of remaining lifespan. The monastery profits. The knight secures continuation. This imbalance is not concealed. It is inherent. The charter is prepared by a professional scribe brought from the town. It takes 2 days to draft to the satisfaction of both parties. The legal language is precise and comprehensive, specifying the parcels transferred, the revenue claims assigned, the maintenance obligations and their scope, the conditions under which the arrangement terminates, primarily, the knight's natural death, and the obligations of both parties regarding care of the transferred lands. The signing takes place in the manor hall. Witnesses are present: the priest, the abbot's representative, 2 of the baron's administrative minor clerks who have been traveling the region and who are available to witness and to register the transaction in the baron's household records. The son witnesses as the heir and interested party. The senior retainer witnesses in his capacity as head of the household staff. The wax is heated. The seal is brought. The knight holds the seal above the wax and presses it down and holds it for the required count and lifts it. The impression is clear. The charter is set aside to cool. The room is quiet for a moment after the sealing. The abbot's representative picks up the charter and examines the impression and nods and sets it down again. The priest makes a notation in his records. The son refills the wine cups from the jug on the table. Outside, the first light rain of March is falling on the fields. The eastern field is beginning to show the faint green of early growth along the furrow lines, which means the villagers will be thinking about plowing preparation and the horse rental that begins in April. The knight drinks his wine. The charter lies on the table with the wax impression cooling toward its permanent form. The land has moved again. In the days that follow the signing, the practical implications begin to manifest in the texture of daily life. The Western Field's peasant tenants are informed that their rent obligations now run to the monastery rather than to the manor. This change has no immediate effect on their lives. They pay the same amount to a different recipient, but they register it. Tenants understand land transfers at the level of immediate experience. Who they owe, who they fear, who protects them from arbitrary demands. A monastery is a different kind of landlord than a knight. More stable in some ways, less personally present, more procedural in dispute resolution. The peasants of the Western Field will adapt. They always have. The mill revenue assignment is more complex. The miller, who has worked the Eastern Mill for 15 years and who has a well-developed understanding of his relationship with the manor, receives the information with the careful expressionlessness of a man who is calculating his position before saying anything. He asks one practical question. Does his obligation of regular maintenance reporting now run to the monastery or to the manor? The answer, to the monastery, for the duration of the revenue assignment, settles his calculation. He returns to work. The senior retainer says nothing about the charter. He has served this household through 2 campaigns and 3 difficult winters, and the death of the knight's wife and the growth of the heir from a child to a young man who is now, functionally, the dominant force in the estate's future. The retainer has a practical intelligence that registers information without requiring commentary. His adaptation to the new arrangement will be seamless. So the son's adaptation is already complete. He moves through the hall and yard with the quality of ownership that was previously shared and is now, in practical terms, consolidated. He manages the ploughing preparation for April. He corresponds, through the priest, with the Baron's household regarding the spring muster registration. He makes the decisions about equipment and about the horse situation and about the Eastern Fields seed allocation. He does all of this in the presence of his father, without displacement or drama, which is the most efficient and also the most absolute form of succession. The Baron's household sends the spring muster notice in late March. It is addressed in the usual form, to the knight by name, regarding the mounted service obligation of his fief. This is the standard administrative language. The response, prepared by the priest with the knight's authorization, specifies that the fief's service will be provided in person by the heir, acting in the knight's name, with the knight's seal confirming the delegation. A copy of the recent charter is enclosed as documentation of the estate's current state. The Baron's household acknowledges receipt. The heir's name now appears in the Baron's muster records as the active service representative of the fief. The process that began in the yard during the autumn inspection, with a single visible hesitation lifting mail off a hook, has completed its administrative arc in 6 months. 6 months from observed weakness to documented succession, with every step legal, witnessed, recorded, and irreversible. April arrives. The days lengthen. The mud in the tracks begins to firm as the temperature rises. The sounds of the estate shift from the interior sounds of winter. Fire, close conversation, the creak of timber contracting in cold, to the exterior sounds of spring. Hammering from the field maintenance, Voices from the far end of the eastern field where the ploughing has begun. Bird song from the hedgerows along the track that leads toward the village. In the hall, the rhythm has changed. Meals are structured around the heir's schedule rather than the night's. The morning decisions. What needs attention, what can wait, who needs to be seen, originate from the son and are communicated to the retainer and the various household members who depend on clear instruction. The knight is present at meals. He is not absent from the hall, but the authority that filled the room when he walked in has redistributed. He knows when it happened, and he knows precisely. It was the morning in January when the son read the southern neighbor's formal complaint and set down his wine cup with that particular quality of forward attention that meant he was calculating a response. From that morning, the gravity of the household shifted, not suddenly, incrementally, in the way that authority always shifts when the body that anchors it begins to withdraw. The shoulder has improved slightly with the warmer weather. The grinding is less constant. He can lift his arm above the horizontal without stopping, though the full extension required for lance work is still unavailable. The knee remains stiff in the mornings and through extended riding, which means anything beyond a short patrol of the home fields is uncomfortable. He rides short distances, so he has ridden the eastern field boundary twice since February. Both times the retainer accompanied him without being asked. The neighboring knights who are of his generation, those who attended the same levees, rode in the same formations in the campaigns of the 1270s and early 1280s, are dispersing into their own versions of this same pattern. He knows this not through correspondence, but through the information that circulates in the region when priests and merchants and traveling administrative clerks pass through. One man's land has passed to his nephew under a formal guardianship arrangement that preserves the elder's name in the title while giving the nephew operational control. Another man has entered a religious house, a different monastery, 3 days south. Not as a confrater, but as a lay brother, now performing administrative tasks suited to his literacy, eating in the refectory, sleeping in a private cell that is better heated than the hall he left. A third man, without surviving heirs and with debts accumulated over 2 failed campaigns, sold the entirety of his fief to a rising younger baron and lives now in that baron's household in a role that is nominally advisory but functionally dependent. These are the available outcomes. They are not uniform. They depend on the specific configuration of heirs, debts, relationships, and timing. But they share a structural pattern. The functional knight, stripped of the function, becomes a dependent. The nature of the dependency, on a son, on a monastery, on a lord's household, varies. The fact of the dependency does not. The spring muster registration is formalized. The heir's name is confirmed in the baron's records. Equipment is inspected by the baron's marshal in early April, in the yard of the nearest gathering point for the levy. The heir presents himself with a horse that is not a destrier, but is adequate for light mounted service, with armor that has been refitted from the older man's equipment. Adjusted at the shoulders, shortened in the body, the padding replaced throughout. It fits him. He passes the inspection. The incomplete notation in the previous year's muster record is effectively superseded by a new active service, entry under the same fief. The armor was rehung in the hall passage after the refitting. It is a different shape now. The adjustments made for the son's frame have altered the set of the shoulders, the angle of the helm, and the placement of the articulations at the elbow and wrist. It is recognizably the same armor, the same metal, the same basic construction, but it is not the same form. The knight does not touch it after the refitting. The hay in the eastern field grows through April, toward its first cutting. The mill runs. The rents begin arriving in their spring installment. The household accounts for the coming season are calculated and show a surplus modest enough to provide no margin for error, but sufficient to confirm that the estate will continue to function. The son takes the accounts from the priest and reviews them with the careful attention of someone learning a system he will own for the next generation. There is a morning in April, in the second week, when the knight walks the eastern field boundary alone. He goes early, but before the household is fully active, while the morning air still carries the particular cold of pre-dawn that will lift by mid-morning. The field is green and wet with dew. The mill creek is audible from the northern end of the boundary, the water running fast with snow melt from the hills. He walks the full length of the boundary fence, which takes perhaps half an hour, and examines the posts and the condition of the hedge. Several posts have heaved from the winter frost and need resetting. One section of hedge has been pushed through by a deer. He notes these things. He does not own this field anymore. The western field transferred to the monastery. This eastern field is still part of the core estate. But the boundary he is walking belongs, in the succession he has set in motion, to a future that will not include him in any operative sense. He is walking the boundary of land that will be his son's before the decade is out, possibly before the end of this decade, and the boundary posts, he is noting, need to be reset, not for his benefit, but for the agricultural continuity of a property that has already reorganized itself around his absence. He resets 2 of the posts himself. It takes a mallet and some effort. The shoulder protests at the downward strike. He adjusts his grip to drive with the left arm rather than the right, and the work gets done more slowly but adequately. The hedge section where the deer pushed through is examined, and the stems are woven back across the gap, in the way that a man who has managed this hedge for 20 years knows how to do. He finishes before the dew has burned off, so he walks back to the hall. The retainer is in the yard when he arrives, beginning the morning feeding of the 2 remaining horses. The horses lift their heads from the water trough when the knight comes through the gate. They are large, solid working animals with no particular warmth toward people, which is characteristic of horses kept for agricultural work rather than cavalry. They do not have the war horse's trained attentiveness. They are just horses. The retainer says that the morning meal will be ready when the night is. The hall smells of bread and fire. The sun is not yet down from the upper room. The priest is not expected until next week. The household is quiet in the early morning way. In June, the campaign season opens for the Baron's forces. The distant sound of its opening does not reach the manor in any direct form. There are no trumpets heard, no formations visible on the horizon, but it is present in absence. Traders passing through the village heading north mention activity along the roads. The Baron's household is not present in the region. The administrative frequency of their visits, which increased in the late autumn and through winter, has ceased as the active season opens. They are elsewhere, directing the machinery of a military season that does not include this manor in any direct way. The heir departed for the muster in late April. He did not leave alone. He took the senior retainer, who is capable enough as a mounted support man to be useful on a campaign, and one of the horses. He left the second horse and a household reduced to the knight, and the priest on his fortnightly visits, 2 house servants and the miller and his family in their structure by the creek. The hall is quiet. The quiet is not peaceful in the literary sense. It is the quiet of a space that has been evacuated of its purpose. The hall was built for a man who needed space to receive tenants, to hold minor courts, to host the social interactions of a functioning feudal authority. With the heir gone and the military season active elsewhere, the occasions that require the hall's social function do not arise. Tenants with disputes come, are heard, and leave. The knight adjudicates these with the procedural fairness he has practiced for 20 years, but the weight behind the adjudications, the implicit threat of force that made feudal justice effective, is absent in a way it was not absent 2 years ago. Non-tenants comply, because they have always complied with this man's rulings and because the habit of compliance is strong. But they do not look at him with the particular assessment they reserve for a lord who can back his authority with men and horses. They look at him as someone who will be gone before they are, not with hostility, with the patient calculation of people who understand succession. A matter comes before him in June that previous years would have resolved in an hour. a dispute between two villagers over the use of a patch of common wood for firewood collection. The dispute is minor, the legal framework clear, the precedent established in similar cases. He hears both parties, applies the standard arrangement for such disputes, and issues the ruling. The ruling is accepted without visible resistance. So the older of the two disputants, a man of perhaps 50 with the specific posture of someone who has spent his life in physical agricultural labor, thanks him in the formal phrasing used for addressing a lord. He looks at the knight directly, which is slightly unusual. Peasants more commonly address the ground or the middle distance when speaking to authority. The direct look is not disrespectful. It is the look of a man who is filing the moment in memory. The knight notes this. He has been noting these things since winter. The register has been growing. By summer's midpoint, the arrangement with the monastery has become normalized in the household's daily operation. The western fields' rents flow north. The mill revenue claim is tracked by the abbot's administrator, who passes through once per quarter to verify the records. And these visits are brief and procedural. The administrator is a competent lay brother with good handwriting and no interest in the manor beyond its accounts. He comes, he counts, he notes, he leaves. The monastery has sent, through the priest, a reminder of the confrater rights available under the charter. The letter is not a demand. It is information. The rooms in the guest quarters are maintained. The guarantee is active. The knight may, at any time of his choosing, avail himself of the maintenance arrangements described in the charter. The timing is his. The arrangement is permanent. This is what the letter says. What it means is that the option is there whenever the knight decides that the hall is no longer where he should be. The monastery is not impatient. Monasteries never are. They have been absorbing aging knights into exactly this arrangement for generations. The process is familiar. The outcome is certain. The timing is the only variable. The knight reads the letter in the hall in the evening, by the light of a single candle, which is the economical illumination of a summer evening when daylight has just failed, and a full fire is not yet lit. The priest who delivered the letter is eating bread at the end of the table and does not comment. He has delivered this kind of communication before. He knows its weight. A response is not required. The letter asks for nothing. It confirms. The son returns from the campaign in late August. He comes back with the retainer and the horse and the experience of a summer in a baron's field force. He is not the same person who left in April, as he is harder and more assured and carries himself with the specific economy of movement that campaign life produces in young men who pay attention. He has stories from the campaign. He does not tell them to his father in the form of excitement. He reports them in the form of information, what the terrain was like, what the muster discipline was like, what the equipment of other knights revealed about regional variations in armoring, what the Baron said about next season's likely obligations. He is thinking about next season already. He is thinking about the horse situation, because one campaign horse is insufficient for serious mounted service, and about whether the estate's recovering finances will support the acquisition of a second animal before next spring. He is thinking about the grazing boundary with the southern neighbor, which remains technically unresolved, and about what leverage the successful campaign service might provide in a renewed negotiation. He is thinking about the western field, which the monastery now holds, and whether the East Mill revenue assignment might be restructured to the estate's advantage when the terms next come under review. He is not thinking about his father except in the specific calculation of the monastery arrangement and what its activation would mean for the estate's accounts. This is not cruelty. It is the exact same calculus that the feudal system has always applied. Land must produce service. Service requires bodies capable of service. The calculation runs forward from the present. It does not look back. The autumn armor inspection comes again. The mail hangs where it has hung. This year, the inspection is conducted by the son and the retainer. The knight watches from the hall doorway while they carry the armor into the yard and check it in the morning light. They work efficiently. The son knows the process from years of watching it performed, and from his own summer's experience with campaign equipment. He checks the rings with the methodical patience of someone who understands that a broken ring in a critical section of mail is the difference between a wound and a deeper wound. The retainer checks the padding in the helmet interior. They work without urgency and without conversation. The inspection takes less time than it once did. The equipment is in good condition. No failures requiring repair. The armor is clean and functional. It is returned to its place in the passage. Where the son does not ask his father to participate. There is no moment of explicit exclusion. There is simply a task that no longer requires the knight's hands. September. The fields complete their cycle. The grain is cut and stored. The rents are collected. The accounts are tallied. The household inventory is closed for the season and opened again for winter preparations. The fodder calculation is made. There are 2 horses now, the working animals, and their requirements are known and manageable. The knight's physical condition has stabilized at its reduced level. The shoulder's range has not improved significantly. The knee's morning stiffness is a permanent feature that requires management, but does not worsen if the distances ridden remain short. He is not incapacitated in any medical sense. He is limited. And the limitation is sufficient to preclude military function and insufficient to require care. This is the specific condition that the feudal system has no place for. A man who is not sick enough to be cared for and not capable enough to serve. The care arrangements at the monastery were designed precisely for this condition because it is the most common condition of aging knights, and the monasteries have learned over generations that offering care at the moment of genuine incapacity means competing for a man's resources with his heirs and medical costs. Offering care at the stage of limitation, before incapacity, when the man can still make a considered decision, when he still controls the resources being transferred, produces better arrangements for the monastery. The fall proceeds. October, November. The pattern of last year reasserts itself. The muster notice will arrive again. The scutage calculation will be reviewed. The son will be registered as the active service representative. The difference this year is that the accounts support the arrangement more clearly. The Western Field Transfer has eliminated one line of revenue, but also eliminated the mortgage debt it was servicing. The mill revenue assignment is outgoing but fixed and manageable. The core estate, the main fields, the eastern mill, the primary rents, is intact. The son's campaign service was assessed satisfactorily by the Baron's Marshal. The breach notation from 2 years ago has been functionally superseded. The estate is stabilizing. Under the son's management, it will likely continue to function. The knight's role in this stabilization is negative, and his continued presence in the hall, drawing on its resources without contributing to its military function, is the estate's main inefficiency. The monastery arrangement eliminates this inefficiency. It transfers a man who consumes resources to an institution that has agreed to accept him in exchange for land that was already partly committed. The arrangement benefits the son and the monastery and provides the knight with continuation. The winter deepens. The hall is quieter than it was 2 years ago. The son is more present in the space, more central to it, and his centrality expands to fill the room in the way that authority always fills the available space. The knight eats at the same table. He sleeps in the same room. He walks the same stone floor in the mornings. But the hall belongs to the son now, not legally yet, functionally, to entirely. January of the new year. The creek freezes as it does. The mill is still. The fodder measures are recalculated. The accounts are reviewed by the son and the priest, and the findings communicated to the knight as information. Not for his decision, for his awareness. He is aware. The monastery letter has not been answered. The priest, during his February visit, mentions it again in the tone of someone raising an administrative matter that has not yet been resolved. The timing has become relevant. The spring muster will activate again in April. The sun will ride again. The household will reduce to the night, the house servants, and the miller during the campaign season. The whole will function on minimal staff. And the maintenance of a man with no active role in this configuration is the residual awkwardness of a transition that has already been decided in every functional sense and not yet finalized in the administrative one. The knight tells the priest he will write a response. He writes it in March, 2 days before the vernal equinox, in the morning when the light is coming in, well through the hall's eastern opening, and the smell of the fields is beginning to return, the particular green smell that means the frost is releasing the earth. He writes it with the priest's assistance, the priest drafting the legal language, and the knight indicating what the response should say. It says that he accepts the monastery's maintenance guarantee as specified in the charter. It says that he will come to the guest quarters in the monastery by the beginning of May, after the heir has departed for the spring muster. It specifies several conditions regarding the maintenance arrangement that were left slightly open in the original charter: the quality of the private room, access to the monastery garden, the schedule of the weekly masses. These conditions are practical, not sentimental. They are the negotiations of a man who understands that the terms of a guaranteed arrangement are better clarified before arrival than after. The letter is sealed and sent north. The monastery responds within the week. The conditions are accepted. A room has been designated. The abbot's representative will meet him at the gate on the appointed date in May. The weekly masses will be said at the time he has specified, so there is a garden available for walking. April comes. The heir prepares for the muster. Equipment is checked. The horse is evaluated and found adequate. Correspondence with the baron's household confirms the service registration. The retainer prepares for another campaign season. On the morning of the heir's departure, the household assembles in the yard. It is an early morning, pre-dawn, the sky lightening from black to dark gray in the east. The horse is bridled and loaded. The retainer checks the saddle straps with the quick professional examination of a man who has done this many times. The heir is dressed for travel, equipped for the road rather than for battle. The knight is in the yard. The sun mounts. One fluid movement, of the ease of a body that is 17 years past the limitations the knight carries, and sits the horse with the natural uprightness of someone who has spent the past 3 years becoming very good at this. He looks down from the saddle at his father and nods. This is the son's version of farewell. It contains the acknowledgement that they will see each other in some form at the monastery or at the manor at the end of campaign season, that the arrangements are in place, that the estate will function, that everything that needed to be settled has been settled. The knight nods back. The horse moves forward through the gate. The retainer follows on foot, his travel pack over one shoulder. They move down the track toward the road, so the sound of the hooves on the frozen morning track carries in the still air until the track curves behind the hedge and the sound diminishes and the yard is quiet. The house servants return to their work. The day begins its regular pattern, feeding the 2 horses, heating the hall, beginning the morning meal. The knight stands in the yard for a moment after the gate closes. The sky is fully light now, pale blue with the specific clarity of an April dawn that has not yet accumulated the day's haze. The eastern field is visible over the low stone wall, its furrows running in straight lines to the tree line. Birds are audible from the hedgerow. A light wind comes from the north. The armor hangs in the passage. It is the smaller form of his son's frame. It is not his armor anymore in any functional sense. It is the estate's armor, so it belongs to the purpose the estate exists to serve. He is no longer that purpose. 3 weeks pass. The preparations for the move to the monastery are practical. A small chest of personal items, clothing, a few objects of specific meaning. The hall's furniture and equipment stay. The estate's documents stay, organized and available for the son's use on his return. The priest has written to the monastery confirming the arrival date. He leaves on a Tuesday in early May. The house servants watch from the yard. The 2 remaining horses are in their stable. The mill is audible in the distance, the familiar sound of the creek running fast with spring water through the wheel. The grinding of stone against stone that has been the background sound of this estate for as long as he has lived here. And the road north is 2 days' ride on a working horse. The first night is spent at a village inn. The second afternoon, the monastery's bell tower comes into view from the road, visible above the tree line, the stone dark against the white clouds of a May afternoon. The abbot's representative is at the gate as promised. He is a composed man, perhaps 40, with the administrative manner of someone who has managed many such arrivals. He shows the knight to the room designated in the charter. It is small in the guest wing, with a window that faces the garden. The bed is adequate. The floor is stone. A chair has been provided. The evening meal is taken in the guest refectory, with 3 other residents of the guest wing who are present for their own reasons. A merchant recovering from illness, a pilgrim resting before a long journey south, and an older woman whose son is managing her former estate somewhere in the region. They eat together in moderate silence. The meal's standard monastic fare: bread, beans, a portion of salted fish, nutritious and uninteresting, and reliably present. After the meal, the evening office is audible from the church. The sound of the chanting moves through the stone walls with the particular resonance of a space that has been built to hold that sound for centuries. It is not dramatic. It is continuous. He sits in the chair in the room and listens to it. The south wall of the room is stone. The window is narrow and faces the garden, where the monastery's kitchen herbs are beginning to show the particular dense green of established plants in May. A rosemary bush near the garden wall is in early flower, blue-gray from this distance. Beyond the garden wall, the monastery's agricultural lands are visible in strips, ploughed and seeded, managed by the lay brothers who maintain the institution's practical operations. The room is quiet. The office ends. Footsteps pass in the corridor outside and diminish. The monastery settles into its evening silence. Back at the manor, the fields are green and the furrow lines are straight, and the mill is running. The son is somewhere on a road heading toward the Baron's muster point, his armor clean and fitted to his own frame, his horse moving at a steady pace. The tenants of the western field are ploughing land that now belongs to this institution. The peasants of the main fields are preparing for the season that belongs to the heir. The estate will function, the service will be rendered, and the land will produce what it produces, and the rents will be paid, and the boundary with the southern neighbor will eventually be resolved or not resolved, and the mill will run until it doesn't, and will be repaired when it stops. The system continues. In the morning, the bells ring at the canonical hours. The guest refectory provides bread and a warm drink before dawn. The garden is accessible after the morning meal. The knight walks the garden path in the May light, the gravel of the path firm underfoot, the kitchen herbs producing their various smells in the warming air. His shoulder is stiff in the morning. It will loosen somewhat as the day progresses. The knee is as it is. He walks the garden path at the pace his knee permits. The rosemary is in full flower along the south wall. At the end of the garden, a stone bench has been placed against the east-facing wall of the church. From this bench, a portion of the monastery's agricultural land is visible. Long strips of cultivated earth extending to the tree line in the distance. Somewhere in that view is where the western field's revenue comes from now, though the specific location is not obvious from here. The land is indistinguishable from the monastery's other holdings at this distance. It looks like all the other strips. It produces what it produces. He sits on the bench. The morning light comes over the church wall and falls on the garden. The birds in the orchard to the west are active in the way of May mornings. The monastery around him is beginning its daily work, the sounds of the institution moving through its routine tasks. The rhythmic sounds of the kitchen, not footsteps in the cloister, a distant hammer from somewhere in the agricultural compound. His name is in the monastery's register now, listed in the confrater records: name, estate, date of arrival, terms of the maintenance arrangement, specific charter reference. The record will be kept in the monastery's archive indefinitely. The land transactions are recorded in the same archive. When he dies, the records will note the date and the weekly masses will continue as specified. His name will appear in subsequent documents as a historical reference in the property records. The land will continue after him in the way land always continues, passing from use to use, obligation to obligation, generation to generation, indifferent to the specific body that stood on it in a given decade. He spent 30 years riding out of a manor gate in armor on a horse with a name. He enforced boundaries by presence. He answered musters by the capacity of his own body. He held the position inside the system that the system required him to hold. He cannot hold it now. There is no dramatics in this, no public humiliation, no spectacular defeat, no named enemy who brought him low. The process that ended his function was the same process that produced it. The system calculating, redistributing, adjusting. A younger frame in older armor. A new name in the muster record, a different set of wax impressions on the land documents. The bench is cold through the wool of his clothes. He does not move yet. The morning progresses. The sun moves over the church wall. The garden fills with light. So the smells of the kitchen herbs are stronger in the warmer air. The rosemary along the wall throws its specific sharp smell across the path when the light breeze disturbs it. He will eat at the refectory at midday. He will walk in the afternoon if the knee permits a longer circuit of the garden. He will hear the evening office from the room. He will eat again. He will sleep in the bed provided. This is the continuation. Not comfort, exactly. Not celebration. Not the hearthside retirement of the imagined life, surrounded by men who want to hear about banners and charges. The imagined life was always imaginary. The actual structure never contained that ending. What the structure contained was this: land in exchange for service. Service rendered for 30 years. Service no longer renderable. Land redistributed to ensure service continues. Now the exchange is complete. The system does not pause to mark the completion. In the Baron's household, the muster records for this season are being finalized. The young knight from 2 valleys east who attended his first levy in April is being noted for his performance. The marshal is completing the attendance rolls. The campaign season is active. In the monastery garden, the rosemary continues to flower. The armor is in the manor passage, adjusted to a younger frame. It will be checked again in autumn. It will be carried to the next muster. It will be worn in the following campaign by a body that can hold a lance level at the shoulder, without the shoulder locking at the extension. The function continues. The man who performed it sits on a cold stone bench in a garden and breathes the May air. Somewhere, distant, and a bell rings the canonical hour. Footsteps move in the cloister. A door closes. The monastery resumes its afternoon. He remains on the bench a little longer. The light on the garden wall is direct now, the shadows shortened to midday length. The sounds of the institution's daily work continue around him without reference to his presence. This is what remains. The bread, the room, the record in the archive. The masses said weekly in the church whose bells he can hear from the garden. He was a moving part. He is still. The system moves forward without him.